with a number of educational institutions and nonprofits, including but not limited to Tulane, Xavier, as well as New Orleans public schools. He has previously served as the regional vice president for major gifts with the American Heart Association. He's also served as a director for the Office of Development for Episcopal Community Services of Louisiana, as well as the Chief Development Officer for Operation Reach. He has served also on the board of New Harmony High School, which is a state charter school focused on environmental and resilience. And they provide opportunities to explore and develop young minds and leaders of the future with a focus on coastal environment. So he has earned he's earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from George Washington University, as well as the University of the District of Columbia. And honestly, the same goes for Arthur. He is extremely renowned in this space, and we could go on for hours about the wonderful accomplishments that he and his organization has made within this space of coastal resilience. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Angela and Arthur so that we can get this discussion started. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jasmine. And so let's just start off with the organizational history of Healthy Community Services. So we're a nonprofit based in the 7th Ward, located here in New Orleans, and we organized in 2013. And after about 5 years, we realized that our work was so impactful that we needed to be funded. And so in 2018, we became an IRS nonprofit status. And the areas that we focus in are stormwater management, dealing with green infrastructure interventions by educating residents around that, coastal resiliency and adaptation from an urban perspective view, getting residents to understand who live in urban areas just how important and just how close we really are to our coast and the effects that has not only on those communities that are right directly geographically in their proximity to the coast, but the impact that New Orleans as a major business center has to the coast. And then we look at our urban ag programs where, because of our climate changes, we know that there are food deserts and people are not able to have access to food. And so we teach folks how to grow their own foods in order to live healthier lifestyles from a public health lens. And so that's what we do in that space. Next slide. And so to date, we have 23 green infrastructure projects that totals 10,000 gallons of stormwater management that we're managing stormwater. That's per rain event. That's inclusive of those projects like bioswales, rain gardens, planter boxes. And in addition to that, for those folks in entry level, would be simply a rain barrel. And so 16 of them are installed within the 7th Ward, and they're managing 800 gallons of stormwater per rain event. We've planted 267 trees to date to help with the urban heat island effect. And that is a research project that's going on. And later on in the slide, I can give you the more specifics about that. We also have an urban agriculture green infrastructure farm that is certified as a grower by the Louisiana Department of Ag. And then we've hosted one coastal cohort with the Foundation for Louisiana, and we're on our second Native Plant Academy, which is to introduce our youth to our coastal issues and for them to become good stewards of our coast as well. And I think the next one is for Arthur. You're on mute, Arthur.
I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Angela, for that. The Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development, or CSED, was organized in 2006 after Hurricane Katrina. And our founders, Pam Pam DeShields and Charles Allen felt it was necessary to create a platform for residents in the lower Ninth Ward who were greatly impacted by the disaster. Unfortunately, Pam is no longer with us. She did pass in 2009, but Charles Allen, is the other co-founder, is still very active with us. In 2009, we organized, similar to what Angela mentioned, as a nonprofit and got our IRS nonprofit status, 501c3. Our areas of focus are threefold with a lot of extensions, but it's natural environment and coastal restoration, the importance to urban communities and underserved communities, not only in Louisiana and New Orleans area, but also around this country, particularly around the Gulf Coast. Second is built environment with a focus on economic development, realizing that communities, underserved communities, need to have ways to feed that community to keep its existence and growth. And the third is food security, and nutrition, this being a key component for residents in both the lower Ninth Ward, but also many underserved communities where being a food desert, as Angela mentioned, is very prominent, and the need to have healthy and fresh fruits and vegetables and meats as well, making a difference. Next slide, please. Our projects that we've worked on, to give you an example, we've been very heavily involved with volunteers, 5,000 volunteers incorporating over 1,500 hours of community learning and community recovery services in the community since we've been established. We've also worked on the restoration area of coastal wetlands with 1,700 cypress trees being planted in our coastal wetlands, and our community we call Gratitude Gardens we established to grow some of those trees from seedlings. And besides the cypress trees being planted in the wetlands, we've also had citrus fruit parks in the lower Ninth Ward, creation of a wetlands nursery to establish growing of trees and creating an interest in nursery development, and also green infrastructure parks, realizing that with some of the green space that was left after Hurricane Katrina, where there used to be houses in those communities, using that space to be attractive and not be wastelands or dumping spots in the community. So we constantly are working with that to use those infrastructure areas as parks and opportunities for learning, as well as research and science. Also, our CSCD Environmental Learning Center and Outdoor Classroom was acquired in 2015. And this is highlighting community environment education and citizen science opportunities. And also Bayou Bienvenue, which is the bayou on the other side of Lower Ninth Ward, we've created a wetlands triangle platform that was created after Hurricane Katrina, and in conjunction with several universities, including University of Wisconsin, Tulane University, and UNO, as well as other nonprofits, looking at an opportunity to get community, both citizens and scientists and scholars, a closer viewpoint of the wetlands, and particularly Bayou Bienvenue Triangle, which is closest to the community. So this provides both education, science, and research opportunities as we continue to nurture the importance of both restoration and also climate action. Next slide, please. So as we talk about our objectives, and I guess we wanted to look at how we define coastal resiliency and strategic adaptation, engaging underrepresented communities, and understanding the role of public health and climate equity, and also understanding the role of economics and housing. Next slide, please. So as we talk about coastal resiliency and strategic adaptation, we want to kind of give you a definition of coastal resilience. Coastal resilience means building the ability of a community to bounce back after hazardous events such as hurricanes, coastal storms, and flooding, rather than simply reacting to impacts. This is important as we talk about resilience. That is a term that's used a lot in these days and times, and kind of what it means both for coastal and for communities that are coastal communities in that. And then we look at the adaptation strategies that are intended to inform and assist communities in identifying potential alternatives, realizing that once again, because of the disasters that have happened, how it has impacted those communities, how do you engage those communities to better deal with those disasters and also react to the impacts, and to put recovery efforts in place that both talks about policy and again, economics, and this is where part of the built community involves, as well as the health issues as we're seeing, with the pandemic in today's world. Next slide, please. So as we look at coastal resilience, one important aspect is community outreach to, we call restoring urban habitats. This is key because many times as we talk about coastal restoration, we don't think of urban centers as being part of that discussion. And that's not true. And particularly in Louisiana and in New Orleans, where everyone sees some type of watershed, waterway when they come out their front door, whether it's a lake, a bayou, some aspect of that. So we live in an urban center where habitats are very important. And also in those habitats around water, we also see different types of things. I call them things that fly, things that swim, and things that crawl. And it's very commonplace. So in an urban center where we're seeing birds and turtles and alligators and snakes and things of that nature that are in our backyards in many instances. So it's important as we look at how to restore our urban habitats, how that plays a key role in understanding coastal resilience and the importance in our communities. And we can't leave that out, that it's not only areas outside of urban areas, but it also includes urban areas itself. We also look at how do we promote environmental stewardship. This is the ownership of those habitats in our urban centers and getting to help community and from basically almost from birth to children in K-12 and K-12 plus, the understanding that the stewardship, the ownership of our environment is so important if we're going to keep our environments healthy and keep our communities healthy as well. We have to understand what the importance of that stewardship is and how do we make that happen, and engaging all members of the community. So those that are young, but those that are not so young as well. And intergenerational engagement is very important in that aspect. Next slide, please.
That's me. Okay.
That's you, Angela.
You're absolutely correct about our natural environment and environmental stewardship, because as our environment changes, being in an urban setting, and I know that in the 7th Ward, I've never seen a crane before in my life, but because of displacement of the animals and wildlife that lives in natural habitats, they're starting to migrate more into the inner city. And so for me, when I see a crane that really would be normally at the coast in the inner city, that lets me know that things are changing environmentally. And then what's unique about New Orleans is that we have both an urban setting and a rural setting. And whether or not folks want to believe it or not, the New Orleans East section of the city along Chef Highway, the New Orleans East area is the greatest land mass in our city, and it's home to natural habitats that are recognized by our federal government, such as Bayou Sauvage, and the area that encompasses what's going to be the New Orleans Land Bridge. And so if you leave here with nothing else, know that we live in a beautiful environmental setting that's unique and different from any place else in the country. And for Healthy Community Services, we've helped to host these coastal cohorts that have been funded by the Foundation for Louisiana. And from that, residents have been able to go on to receive fellowships from the Foundation for Louisiana. So I would advise our listening audience and members and participants to look at their website to see what they're offering in the way of coastal learning. For us to get involved with the Native Plant Academy, like I said earlier, that was for us to get young people involved, that intergenerational coalition, so to speak, that you spoke of, Arthur, to get kids who are normally in the urban centers that don't even realize the value of what we have in our environment here. And so that Native Plant Academy is a 6-week cohort. The applications are currently open for this year's cohort. And what's exciting about that is that the participants get to receive a stipend. Everything is all paid for them. This year, we will be going to the Discovery Wetlands in Houma for our kids to experience what's going on in the Terrebonne Barataria Basin. And so it's just an exciting time for young people to get involved, to learn. And there's no prerequisite of your knowledge about this. It's for youths age 12 to 19. And I would just encourage everyone who is eligible to apply to go ahead and apply. But what else is most important for those of us who are living in urban settings is connecting to the coast. For instance, the economic impacts of that coast directly affects those who are in the hospitality industry. All we have to do is look at the BP oil spill and how that affected the seafood industry, which affected the hospitality industry, which affected people's way of making a living on our natural waters. And then the physical impact that the coast presents with more intense and more frequent storms, with the storm surge, and how much of that coastline that we've lost that protects the city of New Orleans. I have had the pleasure and blessed in being able to see our city both by boat, land, and through the air in order to see what are our barriers. And when you see the land going back and realizing that those what were those natural barriers and that they're no longer there, it's no surprise why we have so much of a storm surge during hurricanes and more frequent occurrences of these types of weather events. Next slide. And so when we talk about looking at engaging underrepresented communities, I live and work in a community that I'm a 4th generational resident of. And so my family goes back to the 7th Ward, to the early 1900s. I have not been able to trace them back further than that because people of color just were not looked upon to be able to, we were property. We were not considered human. So beyond that, it becomes a little bit difficult to trace your ancestry. But in working in these communities, it takes a community effort to do that. None of what I do with Healthy Community Services is done alone. We have a great staff that's a team. And it's important that if you're going to work in this space, that you collaborate with other organizations. And so listed here, you see the organizations that Healthy Community Services partners with: the Waterwise Gulf South Greater Treme Consortium, Bunny Friend, Idawood Neighborhood Park, Holly Grove Dixon, and Groundworks New Orleans. All of these organizations are working to build resilient neighborhoods. And these are neighborhoods that are inclusive of everyone. They're mainly predominantly African-American communities, but they're inclusive of everyone that lives, work, pray, or even travel through those neighborhoods. And so in doing so, you have to build trustworthy relationships. You cannot get this work done. First of all, if you're collaborating with someone that you're not trusting of. And the organizations, you need to have similar goals and values in order for that to be successful. Next slide. And then in working in communities, and I put this in bold because I need you to understand that we have to respect the communities that we are working with. You're not there. I like to say that most Black communities, we don't need a savior. We need someone, if you have the skills, to come in and respect the cultural norms of those communities and work with them. They're not to be observed as a and I hate to use this term, you're not at the circus where you're observing what's going on in the ring. These are people. These are real people with real issues, with real lives that you have selected to work with. And so I like to say, leave the 3 E's: engage, educate, and empower communities. And most importantly, leave that community with a tangible asset. For us, we are managing, like I said, 10,000 gallons of stormwater per rain event. So every time it rains, we're managing 10,000 gallons of water. Now, let that settle in for you as to what that means and the impact that that asset has with those green infrastructure projects that we've put in. That means reduce flooding. That means you can get into your house. That means that your car may not flood. And with that, we have established 2 green blocks where everyone on that block had the opportunity to participate, and we assessed and saw what the need was for that block to put in these green infrastructure interventions. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Passing the ball off. You're right. And when you're talking about engaging underrepresented communities in our communities, it's also important as we look at community resiliency about, reducing flood risk, identifying what that real risk is in that community and focusing on that. That gets engagement with the community, that gets buy-in, because then they can understand and feel the impact of what is happening in their environment, in their community. Also increasing awareness and understanding as we talk about the multiple lines of defense and strategy concept. And what that concept really is that as, for example, in the lower 9th Ward, we have Bayou Bienvenue on one side and we have the Mississippi River on the other side of the community. Community is in the middle. And we recognize that if a hurricane comes up through the Gulf, if it comes through the mouth of the Mississippi, it's going to come by the lower 9th Ward. Or if it comes through the wetlands, it's going to come by the lower 9th Ward. So it's important understanding that how we protect our community. So by having the levees and our wetlands are so important because they break the wind and the water and the surge coming if there's a hurricane, tropical storm, or as we've now seen in more recent times, it's the importance of just regular rain patterns coming in that's bringing flooding into our communities, not a quote unquote identifiable storm or hurricane coming in. Also, as we look at other disasters such as health disasters and other aspects, this multiple lines of defense becomes part of our concept and part of the community strategy to keep the community safe. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. And understanding and engaging community is also looking at public policy and advocacy. Civic engagement and environmental science are co-equal factors needed to produce equitable public policy on climate resilience. Basically, it's understanding, the laws. It's understanding how do we bring about change and how do we engage our communities in bringing this change about. So it's not only just our elected officials, policymakers who we put in place, but it's really the community making sure that those policymakers understand what's important. And the key factor on this civic engagement or community engagement is also realizing that things change. We've seen the pandemic come, and that has changed everything in a very short span of time. I mean, in the last year almost, we've changed drastically. We would have never thought this 2 years ago that this would have been the case. So understanding what laws need to be put in place, understand what practices need to be addressed, and getting the community engaged because they're most impacted is so important. with community engagement, and environmental science plays a role in understanding this, again, as we've seen through the pandemic and COVID-19, the importance of communities knowing knowledge base, but also their opinions, their impact, helping to make sure our communities are safe and healthy. Next slide, please. We in CSCD did that from the very kind of beginning after Hurricane Katrina. We wanted the voices of all residents to have a say, to positively impact any positive change coming into the community. And we facilitated community conversations around Louisiana's coastal master plan, that being a policy document. We also look at building positive relationships with residents and integrating that with equity within our restoration policies and projects. All that being said, it's how do we bring government into play? How do we bring policymakers, whether they be local, state, or federal, into understanding the importance of our communities? Too many times decisions are being made by those who are not impacted in our communities. And Angela and I, we both, we live and breathe this all the time. And we're hearing our communities, whether community leaders, community residents, explain that, well, those leaders don't understand what's going on with us. They're making decisions that are impacting us many times negatively and not realizing the importance of the decisions they're making. They're not even asking us what we need, and they're just telling us what we have. We see that in the pandemic as well. Decisions being made from Washington, D.C., the administrations, where they trickle down to our communities, and our communities say, well, this is not what we need. We have that, we need something else, or this is not enough of what we need. So this is the importance of public policy, and really community policy making and advocacy are so important in doing that. And we as nonprofits and community-based play a conduit in relation of bringing those into play in our communities, and then extending them into our both local and state and even federal policy makers to really get them to understand the importance of community engagement. Next slide, please. We also seek to find common ground. We realize that, there is no silver bullet that's going to make everything perfect, and that we have to build on community-centered engagement in Louisiana. We started doing this in our communities, not only in the lower Ninth Ward, but in other communities within Louisiana, within New Orleans, and then within Louisiana, and then along the Gulf. We find that there are lots of communities that are very similar in their environmental makeup, similar in their equity makeup and relationship, particularly communities of color, Black, brown, yellow, and others that are there, and underserved communities. So we have to find this common ground. We have to address the differences, but also the likes and the consistency and honesty. Honesty is a big word in that. And these things are important because that's how you build trust. And I know Angela talked about that back a few slides ago, early in our discussion about trust. Trust is one of the most important aspects of getting community buy-in and engagement in that point. And this is a constant building and keeping that trust. And so this approach can make us successful in bridging the divide between policymakers, whether it's lower nine residents, but community residents, both in New Orleans and Louisiana, and really across the country, and really across the world. We've seen how that whole idea of global trust can be eroded very quickly, and it takes a long time to build it back. Next slide, please. Angela.
Thank you, Arthur. So in understanding that we live in a global society, if we look at it as a whole, what happens in one area definitely affects what happens somewhere else. And so with that, looking at it through a public health lens, we look at this based on the social determinants of health, and the American Public Health Association defines the social determinants of health are the conditions in the places where people live, learn, work, and play that affect the wide range of health risks and outcomes. And so today we'll just look at a few of those. There are 8 social determinants of health. So we will specifically look at urban heat, food access, and economics and housing. Next slide. And so understanding that role that public health plays with climate equity, and these are all the social determinants of health. And public health professionals assess a community's wellness and life expectancy by these social determinants of health. Based on the zip code that you live in, we can estimate what your life expectancy is going to be. And since the pandemic, in Hispanic communities, your life expectancy has decreased by 1 year. Now look at that in the African American community, your life expectancy has decreased by 3 years, because of the disparities in health because of this pandemic. Next slide. And so looking at urban heat, Healthy Community Services has the one research project. It's a 4x2 square block area with researchers from the University of Michigan and Dillard University. And we working with scientists from the American Geophysical Union. We have reforested that area with 267 trees. And the reason that we look at urban heat is because we know, once again, our climate is changing. We have more intense and frequent heating. Our communities are not cooling down. Next slide. Because we don't have enough of the urban natural habitats that we have. And so we also have what we are proud of. This is the Piece de Resistance, is a solar powered weather station. And what that solar powered weather station does, it helps us to monitor heat, rain, wind speed, ultraviolet light, and we have sensors, excuse me. And with that solar power station is that we have a charging station. Just look at what happened last week with the freeze. Would it have been nice if you had had a solar power station that you can charge your small electronic devices on? Where the neighbors in my community, they were able to do that not only for this weather event, but during Hurricane Zeta. Neighbors were able to charge their small electronic devices. And hopefully this fall, we will be able to send out text heat alerts to residents so that they'll know that this is not a good time to be out doing daily essential activities. Currently, heat alerts come from the airport, which is in a natural habitat setting. And so whatever the heat temperature is at the airport certainly is not what the heat temperature is in my community. And the radiant heat remains there even at night. So think about it, even at night it's still hot that you can't go outside. Next slide. And so for us, the other programming that we look at is food access. And we have worked with LSU Ag for residents to receive gardening certifications. We have a cultural culinary competency workshop that is coming up soon with cooking demos. And I'll give you a little caveat. We have Chef Mia X, the Grammy Award winning rapper who is a 7th Ward native. She will be doing cultural competency cooking. I won't tell you what we'll be cooking, but go to our website, you'll be able to see it. And we also have Madame Barbara Trevine, who will be explaining why we cook the foods we cook, why we grow the foods that we cook. I'm proud to say that during the pandemic, HCS was able to build a 70 square foot greenhouse where we can do our starts and have people to come in and serve as an educational space for residents to understand growing patterns, when to plant, when to harvest. And with that, we, once again, keeping with the management of water, we have 4 green infrastructure raised beds. One is 14 by 2, 8 by 2, 4 by 2, 5 by 2, and 6 by 2 feet. So it's able to have a good capacity of vegetables so that we can do the crop rotation. And now I'm learning something new, agriscaping. Arthur, I don't know if you've heard of that term, but agriscaping looks at the microclimates, and you're using the sun and the shade to be able to better plant. So that's something that we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, we need to talk about that offline.
Agriscaping is the new thing now. Next slide. And so food access is important because communities with the highest food insecurity face prevalence of disease. And that wouldn't be a surprise because we're eating food as a coping mechanism. I certainly do it during hurricane. We talk about our hurricane snacks that we have to get our hurricane snacks. And oftentimes it's not the best, foods. I don't know anybody who's getting their hurricane snacks where they're getting the oranges and apples, they're getting the cookies, the chips, the candies, the good foods. Right. And so disproportionately, you'll see more fast food restaurants in communities of color. And it's costly to eat healthy. I used to say that, you got to take a loan out before you go to Whole Foods to buy food because it's costly to buy food, but it's not costly for you to grow your own food. And with that, we were able to provide seeds to 65 families, not only the seeds and the soil and the pots, because if I give you seeds and you don't have money to buy soil, well, it doesn't make sense for me to give you seeds. So that's one of the barriers when we're talking about working with communities, that you need to remove all the barriers. I mean, I can give you seeds, they'll sit on the shelf, but if you don't have the soil in the pots to grow them in, or even the know-how to grow them, I'm not helping you any. And again, we see this problem worsening because of extreme heat and extreme cold. Next slide. Okay, Arthur, this is you.
This is me. Thank you, Angela. And you're absolutely correct. And I think as we look at and blend in understanding the roles of economics and housing in these deterrents as well, we realize that economics, infrastructure, culture, and housing are all linked together. When we look at quality of life issues, we really have to blend things together. We are humans. We don't just have an arm, and we have all our body parts, arms, legs, fingers, and they're all linked together and they're all important. And so when we look at this, we must tie these connections in. As Angela has said as well, we have to be able to blend these factors, all these factors together. We are humans, we're not machines. And this is so important. And that has been sometimes left out, even in the education and discussion, that, there have been separate silos that we've been taught, but they do blend and link together, like poverty and, underserved communities and what we eat and how we live and jobs. We have better jobs, we can do better things with our quality of life. So economic growth is important. It has to be linked to the strategies that we talk about in intentionally connecting people and communities to opportunities. Economic opportunities are so important, and then they do breed, again, a better quality of life or better linkage. Our mission has been to develop and implement creative community-based strategies that enhance economic opportunities in our communities. We've tried to show examples that can be used in other communities, whether throughout New Orleans, Louisiana, or along the Gulf Coast. We want to generate solutions to community economic problems. These problems many times weren't created by the people that live there. The people many times that live in our coastal communities or underserved communities along the coast were there before the economic engine that sometimes drives that community or drives through that community was there. And they're having to live with that. They couldn't move away. So then we have, of course, certain health problems with Cancer Alley and with health disparities. So it's really important as we look at how we generate solutions to working with economics and economic development in the communities. And we have to look at building long-term community capacity. Our communities are designed to be there for sustainable periods of time, not for short periods of time. And that means that we foster the integration of economic, social, and environmental objectives together, which again goes back to that whole point of listening to the community, of engaging and having discussions with the community, not just telling them what you're going to do. And this is so important, and the communities get that, but you have to be able to open up and you got to hear the good and the bad, and have that discussion at that point. Next slide, please. When we also look at how do we, foster a vibrant, prosperous, and growing community, our environment, our planet is based around communities. It doesn't matter whether you're in North America, South America, if you're in a hot climate and a warm climate, wherever in this whole world. So it's important that we look at how do we grow our communities like we would grow our plants. They need to be nurtured, they need to be tended to, they need to be looked at. There may need to be alterations when something changes, and how do we make that happen so that we can be prosperous. And the strength of the Lower Ninth Ward and our communities is to provide opportunities for quality of life for all residents, not just some residents. And when we look at equity and inclusion, these things are also so important. They've been there. We've been talking about it. They're not new. It's important that we blend those aspects in, that we help achieve stable, racial and economic diversity and interconnectedness for our communities, because building strong communities means that we have more strong, vibrant cities and states and the United States and our global area. And those things are most important there. Next slide, please. Angela, I think you're next.
And so from everything that you've heard today, I like to leave people with a takeaway. And before I give you that takeaway, let me leave you with one more sobering statistic because of the pandemic. According to Feed America, 50 million people don't have access to food and they're hungry. Of that 50 million people, 17 million of them are children. And so if you don't think that our environment plays a role in our everyday life, and that you either, if you don't know or you don't know what your role will be, I will leave you with this. And this is outside of the King Center in Atlanta. And it reads, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. And that change starts with you. And so get involved, love your community as I love mine and as Arthur loves his, and together we can make a change. So thank you all for having Arthur and I. This is truly been a pleasure for me to be able to have the opportunity to speak. And I always like to impart knowledge and give people reason for pause and for thought. So Arthur, any final closing words?
I'll say, Angela, you're absolutely correct. And it's so important. It's part of who I am, is that youth are our future. And as I get older, that future becomes closer and closer. We have to depend upon the youth to make change, to make difference. And we have to listen. And if we do that, if we work together, the intergenerational interaction is so significant, whether it be in your home, in your communities, in your job, everywhere in our quality of life. We're seeing more and more that that's important. And so it's a pleasure to be able to address you, to give you a small taste of sort of what we do and how we do it and why it's important. But more so, we want to make sure that we continue to encourage you to engage in your communities, in your domains, and to make a difference. So again, I say thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation and working with Angela. We've worked over the years in various domains and venues, but I think it's the first time that we may be ever presented together. So we ought to do this again, Angela.
Yes, Arthur, I agree. After I finish this
After you
doctoral
finish,
program.
yeah. Okay, I guess, are there any questions or?
Hey guys, my name's Kevin Ferguson. First off, thank you so much for the work you do and this thoughtful presentation. This was really incredible to hear about the work you guys are doing and very encouraging. I think, you know, like you guys, I look at some of the underserved communities and there's so many challenges with some of these things, right? When people are fighting to pay their rent, working multiple jobs, keep food on the table, sometimes something like what's happening on the coast or what's happening with stormwater management are tertiary or thoughts that they just don't really have time for. So the way you guys are engaging with the access, I think is crucial. I'm wondering, you know, you talked about intergenerational, but especially with youth and children, is there any collaboration you guys have with schools for programming that's kind of getting started early with that group?
Well, you want to go, Angela?
I was just going to reference the Native Plant Academy. So the Native Plant Academy is open for students from Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines parishes. And so while we don't have a direct partnership with the school, we provide that information to counselors. We've worked with Son of a Saint with planting the trees. So that was a time when we had an intergenerational interaction. I know that we'll have some programming coming up with younger kids to get involved with planting and growing foods. And the fall is a great time for that with the younger kids.
I would say we constantly are trying to work with our youth, and we've tied in our young people with senior centers in the lower ninth ward to do things together, workshops, community science and citizen science projects are great ways that we've worked with examining the pollution in the water, the Mississippi River, air pollution. We've worked with one of our professors at Dillard University, Dr. Bernard Singleton, in monitoring the air in the lower ninth ward and throughout the lower ninth ward area, because we're a port city. And as the ships are coming along the Mississippi, they are also bringing exhaust into our air and things that we breathe and things that we take into our system. So it's a great community science project, and research is so important, and getting young people and not so young people understanding and working together on research. This is something that we're finding is so important. So it doesn't just have to be the scientists, that we have these community scientists, and they get engaged and they get to working and they get to see things and they get to learn. And it builds for young people the interest of where they want to go and what they want to do as they continue to evolve into their life. But also for those that are not so young, it gives them something, connection as well to our communities and to make a difference. So, we are constantly working with projects, whether they be in coastal restoration and green infrastructure, or bringing those bodies together. We also have encouraged, prior to the pandemic, a great deal of volunteers that come from all over the world that have come to New Orleans, and we work with them and we bring that component into our community and engage with our community residents, with many of these scholars and scientists and educators or business people that come in, who've been coming for conferences and want to do some service learning and service work in that basis. So, these are things we're continuing to evolve and develop. We want to create a community science laboratory here in the lower nine for all people there, but particularly is to encourage young people to see that being a scientist, it can be exciting. There's a lot of things in that they live and breathe and see every day that they need to understand better, and they can make a difference.
And let me just add, when you're doing excavation work on these green infrastructure projects, it is always expect a surprise. We've discovered when we had volunteers from Lusher, the kids discovered Coke bottles that when Coca-Cola actually had a plant here, and that bottle has been dated 100 years. And just recently, the kids that we were working with Groundworks NOLA discovered ale bottles that still had the beer and ale in it that our community used. This is a 300-year-old city, so you may find anything when you're excavating these projects. And apparently these ale bottles are a collector's item, and they discovered 10. I got 2, because you on my project, whatever you find, part of that belongs to me. And so I have 2 of them. And we also found old depression glass bottles that pharmacists use to mix medicines with. So it's always exciting when you're on a project of what you're going to find in doing this work.
Do we have any more questions for Arthur and Angela?
I have a question. I know we're almost at time, so I want to be sensitive. Arthur and Angela, thank you so much. This is fascinating. I'm Lindsay. I'm also with YLC. Birding is one of my hobbies. So the stuff you guys are talking about with citizen science, community science, like it speaks to me in so many ways. And my curiosity is, with an uptick in people doing home gardens, because of the pandemic, what would be, do you all see a new opportunity to engage people? Like, my husband has become such a gardener. He did the LSU Master Gardener class online, and they had thousands of people doing it. So, how do we leverage, how do we take the window of opportunity that's opened and use that as an entry point to get people to understand these deeper and more connected issues that, you all have been doing the work in? How do we use this as an entry point? Because thinking about our YLC membership population, some of our folks are maybe just at that entry point, and how do we get them to this deeper learning place that you all have already been developing and investing in?
Well, I'll say that we have to collaborate together. We have to work together. There's work that we're doing. There's interests of your constituents. Let's blend together, and let's talk about how we create something that is going to be of focus and interest to everybody, which is also going to bring about change. Angela?
In policy change or policy awareness, because currently right now, if you're receiving SNAP benefits, you can actually buy plant starts with your SNAP benefits, but the vendors are not set up to be able to accept that. And so if I'm a recipient of SNAP benefits and I want to be able to use my SNAP benefits to purchase a start or seeds, I can't, because vendors are not set up to do that. And so policy awareness and bringing that to bear on vendors to be able to give you those opportunities. And finally, again, just creating the opportunities for people to be engaged. Once you give people the knowledge, you can't take that back. You just can't take that back.
Well, thank you both so much for the knowledge you have given us today, and your time. Your perspective is really invaluable. And as a organization with a mission of building stronger, more equitable communities through young leadership, and are getting our hands into really enacting positive social change, the two of you are the kind of leadership that we look up to for paving the way and showing us how to do that in the best ways possible.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you to everybody that tuned in as well. YLC members that joined us today, I just want to remind you that we have Coffee Talks with Charles tomorrow morning at 8:30. This is a just 30 minutes, a brief opportunity, but a really cool one where you get to pick the brain of one of our state's key environmental influencers. So I really encourage you to pour yourself a cup of coffee or whatever your morning beverage of choice is, and tune in. Charles is a wealth of knowledge, and it's really cool that we get to tap into that. To do so, you can sign up at ylcnola.org under the events. And then everyone, we have one more of these talks that are open to our membership and our entire community. So I hope you'll mark your calendars. For March 30th, we have Liz Roussel, I hope I'm saying that correctly, the Climate Justice Program Director, going to join us to discuss direct actions and more outreach opportunities to advocate for our state's future. And then that'll be a talk. But thank you again, Angela and Arthur. I don't think we can say it enough.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it. Bye-bye.